You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of The Voice of Reason. My name is Ted Durden. I'm a Southern Democrat. Tonight I'm running solo because my co-host, Mark Reed, who is a West Coast Republican, is at a speaking engagement this evening. So I'm going to be running the show solo. As Mark and I have started to do, we each run a monologue. But before I go to that, for those of you tuning into the show for the very first time, this is a politically motivated podcast where civil discourse is the order of the evening. And I think the fact that this show, its primary mission is to demonstrate that two different people from different backgrounds can have civil discourse about any area of disagreement. And that is most prevalent today. For those of you who have witnessed this political warfare that has occurred recently between Congress and the White House, more specifically between the House and the Trump administration, it was a very sad thing to see, because what we saw is the impeachment procedures which was put in place by the founding fathers for specific reasons to make sure that the president of this country did not abuse his power or use it for his own personal gain. I said from the very beginning that it was going to be a waste of time. There were those who took offense at what the House was doing. President Trump labeled it as a hoax and a witch hunt. I said it then, and I'll say it now. Even though I considered it to be a waste of time, the House was doing their duty, because there are checks and balances in this country, in this government, and they have to go forward with articles of impeachment if there is even the slightest appearance of impropriety committed by the President of the United States. And that's what they did. Now, while President Trump may have labeled it the perfect phone call, and while I do not think that what he did rose to the level where he deserved to be removed from office, it's based on the fact that while he has the right to ferret out corruption wherever he may see it, his timing was horrible. There was even a Republican senator who indicated that what he should have done was gone through the Department of Justice. Trump being Trump, who is accustomed to running a business, being the person in charge, in power, that makes all decisions, his behavior in this instance did not surprise me. But all this proceeding did, from the beginning to the very end, was to divide this country. That's all it did. It didn't solve any problem. Everything that happened along party lines. So we need to get back to the business of having a civil discourse. What I'm going to be playing for you in a moment is a clip that Mark and I took. Mark and I decided to take a trip to the Arizona border. Oftentimes when we talk about immigration in this country, we follow what the media presents. And often they present stories of tragedy by those immigrants who are attempting to come to this country. What gets lost in the cacophony of that noise is what really goes on with the people that live at that border. People such as Jim Chilton, who has a 50,000-acre ranch that borders a large part of Mexico, and the trials and tribulations and the dangers that he faces on a daily basis. So we're going to cut to that clip right now, and when I come back, we'll speak about it some more.
We're out here in Arivaca at Jim Chilton's ranch that borders a 50,000-acre ranch. It borders the Mexican-American borderline, international border, and we're going to be going there to take a look at it. On our drive, Jim is so eloquently pointing out all of the mountaintops around here where the cartels have their scouts that they watch. Now, we've come across a few border agents' trucks, and they're clearly marked as a border agent truck. So these scouts up on the mountaintops are watching, and they probably have their sat phones, as Jim has explained. He got one of them from one of the scouts, probably talking to the ones muling the stuff across the border. So we're going to be doing a full interview over there, taking a look at it, and I hope you guys tune in to the show, Voice of Reason. All through February, we're going to be doing these episodes, and it's the real deal, our border. Not what you see on CNN, MSNBC, or even Fox News. This is the real deal. We're going to get in depth into it and have straightforward conversations about what's happening out here.
One of the things is we talk about, as Mark indicated, a lot of the focus has been about illegal immigration. One of the talking points that gets lost all the time is the amount of drug trafficking that comes through our porous borders. And that is one of the things that Jim Chilton and his family faces on a daily basis. And it's amazing. We've had the opportunity to see some footage that has been recorded over the last 2 years. Tim Foley has also provided some videotapes that indicate exactly what these mules are doing.
Some of the tapes that we'll be showing shows a few years back where the mules were bringing big backpacks, which is mostly marijuana. But now that America, a lot of the states here have legalized marijuana, including California, for recreational use, they don't have to mule that over anymore. So what you're seeing now is fully camouflaged individuals, mules in their scouts, coming across the border with smaller backpacks with fentanyl, methamphetamines, cocaine, and all of the smaller high dollar products. It's really kind of scary to watch some of the tapes where you see just the flow coming through constantly over this side of the border.
So while a lot of the focus of the media has been on the immigration aspect, they are 100% overlooking the drug impact that the immigration is having on our country. And that is one of the things that we're going to be focusing a lot of our attention on, not just on the people that come through illegally, but the drugs. So be sure to tune in. Hi, my name is Ted Durden, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about trust and not trust. Mark and I decided to see for ourselves exactly what goes on at the Arizona border, and we were traveling with Jim Chilton. The interesting thing is, Jim Chilton, where he lives out on that 50,000-acre ranch, is probably no more than about maybe 5 miles from the border. But that trip, because of the road, was a treacherous path. It took us almost 2 hours to get there. Now, the thing about Mark Reed, he wanted to find out what goes on there. And for those of you who don't know about Mark Reed is currently running for office for the 30th Congressional District here in California. Even though I'm a staunch Democrat, I've always said I'm party faithful but not policy loyal. I consider Mark Reed to be a friend. What impresses me most about Mark Reed is that he is pragmatic. He is cut in the image of what George W. Bush Jr. phrased as a compassionate conservative. He is bold. He is unafraid to buck conventional norms, and he believes in doing what's best for the community, for the country, and for his constituents. We both believe that solutions, just like problems, have no political affiliation, and he does not believe in maintaining the status quo. Mark Reed, in the way that he practices his political beliefs, makes me think of a phrase that came from one of my favorite movies, Braveheart. And what Sir William said, you think the people of this country exist to provide you with a position. I think your position exists to provide those people with responsible government. And yes, I've paraphrased there, but that's how I see Mark Reed. He's a good man. And even though I'm a Democrat, I think he deserves very serious consideration from both sides of the aisle. That's what I believe. So having said that, we're going to take a moment and we got to pay our bills, and then we'll be right back.
Hi, I want to welcome Rusty Levin and Harry Nabanian, both trial lawyers for workman comp cases. If you're injured on the job, don't hesitate. Contact an attorney. I did when I was wounded or injured on my job, and I thought I would trust my employer, and it didn't work out quite well. So I found Rusty Levin, handled my case like a professional, worked out way better than any other lawyer that I talked to would have worked out. So Rusty, tell us a little bit about your company of Levin and Nabanian Trial Lawyers.
So at our firm at Levin Albania Trial Lawyers, we handle all matters of workers' compensation, personal injury, and employment disputes, wrongful termination matters, and things like that. We were able to help Mr. Reed out with his workers' compensation case. Unfortunately, workers' compensation injury can be very stressful, intense situation. And at Levin Albanian, we try to get you the most benefit we can of the law, while also easing the stress and anxiety that comes along with that situation, and getting you back on your feet. My partner, Mr. Albanian, he handles the personal injury sides, and I'll let him take it from there.
And just like all injured employees out there, anybody else who gets injured as a result of somebody else's negligence has rights, and the rights that they need to protect immediately. And they should do that by calling Levin and Albanian Trial Lawyers and letting us help ease that tension off of you and get you the result you deserve, while also making sure that you get better in the progress. So we're here for you, folks.
Levin and Nabanian Trial Lawyers is the best company for you to get a hold of when you're injured or have a personal injury. So give them a call at
213-232-4848, 213-232-4848. Thank you.
and let them handle the stress for you while you recover at home. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Ted Durden, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about trust, and I trust churchandlaw.com. When it comes to workers' compensation and employment law, you can trust churchandlaw.com. If you ever need legal advice, you can rely on it's churchandlaw.com. Black and white, no gray, churchandlaw.com. 818-230-3110, churchandlaw.com. A law firm you can trust and count on. Welcome back. So we're going to be playing another clip in a few minutes, and in that clip, it's going to last for a little while. We're going to be talking with Jim Chilton. Now, this series that Mark and I are doing for the month of February is called The Real Deal at the Mexican Border, about what really goes on there. And it's the sort of thing that you really don't hear about in the media. You simply don't. We have an immigration problem in this country. But too often what we do is we focus on the human tragedy aspect of those immigrants that come across the border. And I'm not trying to minimize the trials and tribulations that they may face. But as I indicated before, what gets lost is in the noise that the media makes about the immigrants that come across the border, the ones that are seeking asylum from atrocities that may be experiencing in their country. They don't think about the American citizens that live at the border town and the challenges that they face on a daily basis. They don't think about that. So having said that, we're now going to go into the interview that we had with Jim Chilton, the very first segment on The Real Deal at the Border. I think you'll find it fascinating as well as informative. Now we're here. I'm Ted Durden from the Voice of Reason, and you would not believe. You look at this bucolic setting, how beautiful it is. That mountain in the background, that natural formation, and yet this bucolic setting conceals the danger that lurks out here with the illegal immigration, and not from just a legal immigration perspective, but from the drug trafficking. Now, we all know that the majority of drugs come through legal ports of entry. However, that does not diminish what happens on James Chilton's ranch, which is 50,000 acres, with the drug trade that happens here. During our conversations along this ride, Jim has indicated that over the years, he has discovered 21 bodies where they died due to falls or injuries sustained during illegal drug trafficking. But you don't hear about that on the news. All everyone wants to talk about, all the news wants to talk about, is the human plight of illegal immigration. They don't talk about the impact, because any amount of illegal drugs that comes into this country has a negative impact, and they don't want to talk about that. They ignore it. But out here where Jim lives and other ranchers along the border, they don't want to talk about the dangers they face on a daily basis due to the drug mules that come through this property.
Here for a moment to talk about Jim Chilton's ranch. What amazes me on this, an additive of the mules that come through, the human mules that are packing the drugs, is we haven't even hit the border yet. And from Jim's ranch, we've already been driving for 2 hours. It's hard for me to imagine caravans of individuals constantly coming through here with anywhere from 60 to 100 pounds on their back. Mm-hmm. And they don't walk the roads. They're off the roads. They're in this terrain coming through because they have the electronic surveillance systems, the line of sight systems. So if they can't see that tower, and they know where the tower is because they'll have spotters up on these mountains, the drug cartels, and they have their sat phones. So they're sitting here talking to the mules walking through. So they know exactly where they're going, and they know exactly where the line of sight of the tower is, so they can avoid it. They can see the Border Patrol trucks because they don't come here incognito. They come with a nice big green stripe on their truck, so you can see that truck 20 miles away with a good pair of binoculars. You can see it. So they tell the guys where to walk constantly. Right. So on our drive up here, we probably have seen a good 30 trails already of the drug trafficking trails. Now, think about it. The old days you saw on the news, you saw the big backpacks on the mules, the human mules coming through. Those are the marijuana bales. Right. They don't do that anymore. Now it's typical military style backpacks, and they'll have 30, 40 pounds of methamphetamines, fentanyl, heroin, the high dollar drugs that are coming through now. So they say that the big amounts come through the border. Yeah, they have truckloads that come through, and they're very sophisticated how to do that, but yet they have these drug mule trains coming through here on a daily basis, night and day, walking through, and they're very rarely caught. So you got to think about that. What is really going on the border? I've been around the news broadcasters. They come out, they get their nice clothes and everything, and they don't want to get dirty. They don't want to really dive deep into it. They get their pictures of the little trash camps, and that's about it. You got to dig deep into this and really understand what's really happening in the heartland, not the heartland, on the borderland of our country. And it is not good.
No, and I'm going to add on to that, like what Mark was talking about. They use camouflage gear. They use camo gear.
Yeah.
And as Mark was indicating, they no longer carry the big 70-pound backpacks. The primary reason, marijuana has been legalized in California. Yep. And so they had to shift to the higher end product, the methamphetamines, the fentanyl, the heroin, and products of that nature. Well, what also you have to bear in mind, you have scouts that are set up on top of mountains. They're using night vision. They're using high-powered binoculars. In country like this and land like this, where you could hear a mouse pissing on cotton out here. And so of course they can hear the Border Patrol trucks, so they can notify their mules when to hide, where to hide. These are the sort of things that aren't talked about.
Keep talking, Ted. Steve, pan up on the ridge. Talk about this ridge, Ted.
Right.
Look at this ridge. This
Exactly.
is a valley coming through, and you can see all the way to Arivaca
Right.
from this point. And you can be up on any of these ridges. You can be up on that butte, and you can see everything.
Right, and because of the foliage and the brush and the trees, they provide perfect hiding spots for scouts. They're masked. They're using camo gear. We'll talk about it. You might even see it on some of the footage where after a camera has been planted, a scout came down with a stick and tipped the camera upward so the camera could not see the mules that were coming through. So what that indicates is when the camera was being planted, they were watching what was going on. And again, this is the sort of thing that you don't hear about on the news, that the media doesn't want to talk about. They want to talk about just the human plight aspect. They want to ignore the trafficking that comes through these ranches that borders Mexico. And that's what's missing.
Yep. I'm standing on the Mexican side of the border along with my co-host, Ted Durden. We've come here to give the real deal on our southern border. Now, I'm not wearing my cowboy hat because it's a cliche. I'm wearing my cowboy hat because my family goes back 4 or 5 generations to Virginia, to Kentucky, and California as well. And I have a strong affinity for the trials and struggles that happen to our ranchers because of the lack of border enforcement along our border. They're a minority in this country because they're a small group of individuals that reside alongside of the border, trying to carve out their living.
Right.
But they face these politicians that come out with these press releases like my opponent. Just driving back to the valley, he states. We just visited the ICE detention center in Adelanto. It was heartbreaking to talk to people who have lived in California since they were 5 years old and now, 30 years later, face deportation. This can happen due to a minor legal infraction or no legal infraction at all. ICE calls it collateral enforcement. We need comprehensive immigration reform now. We issue a longer statement. We'll issue a longer statement on our next visit soon. When the hell has this guy come out and visited the border? When has he come out and talked to ranchers like Jim Chilton and found out the real struggles that are happening on the border? He goes to these detention centers and pulls your heartstrings of what's really happening. Jim and his family have been here for how many generations, Jim?
I'm a 5th generation Arizona rancher.
5th generation Arizona rancher, and you have 50,000 acres here.
Yes, I have 50,000 acres. I lease 30,000 from the U.S. Forest Service, 18,000 from the state. I own a couple of thousand. I run about 1,000 head of cattle.
About 1,000 head of cattle. How often do you see migrants, illegal border crossings through your ranch? Because as you were saying when we were driving up here, we drove, about a good 25 miles?
20.
20 miles
Yeah.
to get to this point here. How they have to kind of migrate through another ranch, one of your neighbor's ranches, before they get to yours?
Well, actually here, they just step into my ranch
Oh,
right
this
here.
is your ranch right
Yeah.
here.
And my ranch circles around 3 other ranches. So I actually have about 14 miles of exposure to the Mexican border, 200 trails or so coming through my ranch, where really the bad guys come through here, very seldom immigrants.
Right, they're really regular mules.
Yeah, they're drug mules. That's what
Right.
they are.
Exactly. They're not individuals coming to America looking for a fruit picking job or working at the local restaurant. They're packing back and forth. We had the great privilege of seeing some of your tapes from some of your field cameras.
Right.
And the same guys are walking in and then walking back out without their backpacks.
That's right.
Now, how does the Border Patrol really patrol this area. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the Border Patrol is located in Tucson, Arizona.
How many miles away?
80 miles from here. A guy comes in and checks out his gun, checks out his vehicle, goes to a briefing, roughly an hour can go by.
Right.
It takes 3 hours to drive here, 3 hours back. So they can only be here an hour or two at the most in their shift.
Right.
So they don't come out here. They only come halfway. It's called defense in depth. And in other words, they let the drug packers walk 15 or 20 miles before they even try to apprehend them. And then because there are cartel scouts on the mountains,
Right.
they are able to see the Border Patrol from 5, 10, 20 miles away, and they guide their people right through. And the people going through here are not only drug packers, but they're people trying to get back into the United States that have been deported. And a lot of MS-13s come through here.
Right.
Terrible gangers.
And so basically, the defense in depth is ineffective. Because as you can see, Mark and I, all we literally did was crawl under this fence. You see this long pipe here. There is an adjoining section here where it's bent up, and all we did was crawl underneath. So you see how effective this fencing is. It doesn't stop anything. And it puts ranchers like Jim Chilton and others at great risk. While we were just walking over to this location here, Mark stopped and picked up a used gun shell. Again, indicating the sort of thing that occurs here. People being shot at, possibly killed. You have scouts sitting up on the mountains looking and observing exactly what's going on. There's no protection here. But again, we don't hear about that in the news. We don't hear about that. We have drug trafficking, mules coming through, used to be marijuana, now the marijuana is legal. They bring through higher end drugs, methamphetamines, heroin, all sorts of things are going on right here at the border that nobody's talking about.
You know, Ted, you're a sports guy, and I'm sure you are too, Jim. Can you imagine playing a football game where you actually defended the line of scrimmage 30 yards back?
Right. You'd lose every
how
time.
How many
You'd
games
lose
would you
every
win?
game.
Exactly.
So we're not winning the game in undisclosed areas like this when it comes to illegal immigrants coming through, packing, regardless of what, just human trafficking coming across the border. They're not really being detained if the main station is 80 miles in. Now, we kind of, you know, you said on the way in here, we did see about 5 trucks, right? 5 or 6 of immigration trucks. We saw another one. They were trailering 2 horses in.
Right.
And you were like, wow.
15 miles from here.
15 miles from here still. But you were like, this is really unusual. But then I disclosed to you, I let them know that we were coming up here to interview you. So they decided, I think, to kind of place a few around because I talked to them about that. Why aren't they having more substations? Now, you gave a great offer to the Border Patrol. Tell us about that offer you gave to the Border Patrol of about 20 acres that you have up here.
Yes, if they would put a fence or a barrier in here, a Ballard-style fence, and have a road in here along the fence, and a forward operation base here,
Right.
they could secure the border. They have 27 agents per mile. If you had 27 agents per mile, you could secure the border. The Border Patrol could secure the border.
Absolutely.
Very easily, very easily. But for whatever reason, they won't do it. And again, it's like you talked about the other day. You know, media is only interested in sound bites. They ignore what's really going on here at the border. They don't want to talk about that. They want to, like you said, Mark, they want to pull the heartstrings. They want to talk to the people that give the impression that somehow subversive things are being done to them. Inhumane things are being done to them. Well, what about the inhumanity that's occurring to ranchers like Jim, who are the backbone and foundation of this country? Mark owned ranches, worked on ranches. I grew up on a 210-acre farm in Hope Mills, North Carolina. However, in those 210 acres, I didn't face the challenges that Jim Chilton does or his family. I didn't have to worry about drug mules coming through. He had even indicated just a few moments ago he had MS-13 show up on his property, like 200 miles from his home. But again, we don't hear about that.
Well, Jim, unlike the rest of us, further inland, every time you leave your ranch house to go work your ranch, right? You say goodbye to your wife not knowing if you're going to return, don't you?
Yes, you
In fact-
never know whether you're going to return or not. We've run into people packing AK-47s, and but I'm not leaving this ranch. It's a good ranch, and we have a family cemetery. So I tell people I'm either going to be on top of the ground and below the ground, perhaps.
You're
But you're not leaving.
I'm not leaving.
Well, I love the how would you say, the city dwellers who want to attack the Second Amendment, right? And they don't understand how important the Second Amendment is for individuals like yourself, because you're packing right now. And every time you go on your horse or you come out on your back 40,000 acres, you have to pack because you have no idea. You need that self-defense.
That's correct. There's no cell service down here. You dial 911 and you don't get anything. And then it would take 2 hours for a sheriff to get here. We have to defend ourselves.
Yeah. Well, don't you want to do what the liberals say, defend yourself by whipping out your cell phone?
Point and shoot.
Point and shoot. Take a picture before you die.
Okay.
Yeah.
Post it on social media. Maybe that'll get some attention, right?
I want you to comment on it. This is my opponent's press release once again. After he visited the ICE detention center, right? And he took his little photo op
Way
picture.
over in Adelanto.
Exactly. But this one, he goes in, he says, today, I'm not going to say his name, it makes me choke. Released the following statement after his visit to the Youth for Tomorrow facility in Bristow, Virginia. The facility houses over 100 immigrant children, including 15 children that were separated from their families at the border. I was pleased to join Senator Mark Warner, Democrat out of Virginia, and Congressman Mike Thompson, Democrat out of California, and Congresswoman Doris Matsu, Democrat out of California, and Congressman Jimmy Panetta, Democrat out of California, during a briefing and tour of the Youth for Tomorrow with facility staff and staff from the Department of Health and Human Services. I had the opportunity to speak to some of the children that were currently being held at the facility. These children have faced unimaginable horrors coming to the United States, and the trauma of the journey is only perpetuated by the longer they are separated from their families. The Virginia facility is a fine institution, but children should not be institutionalized when they can instead be reunited with their parents. The facility is currently housing 15 children that have been separated from their families at the border due to the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy. The facility is working diligently to identify the location of the parents of these children. Unfortunately, the process of reuniting the children with their families is hampered by a system that involves a string of entities, including HHS, Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, among others. Jim, you actually have put out drinking water fountains.
29.
29 of them on your
29.
property.
Yes,
Because-
people can come along, just
Come
push
along
a
and
button
drink 'em.
and drink just like in a school hall.
It's just like in a school hall and stuff. But, the human aspect, you understand it completely. Even though we're standing here, we're on the Mexican side of the border, you're on the American side of the border because we didn't want you to break the law. We both understand the human aspect of it. Now, my opponents come across on several occasions talking about the human tragedy, but don't you think it's his inaction and Congress's inaction of fixing the immigration laws, even though he talks about immigration reform?
Yes, it's Congress's fault for not appropriating the money to build a fence and forward operation bases and a road.
Yes.
It's Congress's fault that people get into the United States and become victims.
Right.
People become victims not only of our fellow Americans, but they become victims of the land.
Right.
They can die here in the desert, and that's awful. To find dead bodies is awful.
It really is. I empathize with you on that completely, Ted.
And I'm going to tap on something. I'm going to follow up with what Jim just said. It has been the failing of Congress, and this goes against all administrations. It's interesting that your opponent talks about we need immigration reform now. I'm sorry, we've needed immigration reform for decades.
Yeah.
For decades, and nobody has effectively addressed it. Like I've said on our podcast, you may not agree with what Donald Trump is doing, but he's doing something. He's taking action. And the fact that his action, even though it's pissed people off, is motivated them to try to do something, because something needs to be done. And I'm going to touch on something that's not going to be popular with my fellow Democrats, and that is, he talks about, your opponent, the separation of children from their families. And as Jim, as you talked about, there are Americans that are in prison. Why are there Americans in prison? Because they committed a crime. If you commit a crime, then you have to suffer the consequences of your action. Now, these immigrants that came here illegally, they broke the law. The law acts for a reason. It is supposed to be a deterrent. And if that deterrent is not enough to dissuade you from committing that crime, then you have to suffer the consequences of your actions. And if those people coming into this country, especially after Trump took office, and he did like some boxers, he telegraphed his punch, you knew what was coming. So if you knew that he had a zero tolerance, and if you knew as an illegal immigrant, as you bring your children, real or not, rented or not, then you knew what could possibly happen when you got here, that you would be separated from these children. So I'm sorry, you can't come and cry and complain to me the unimaginable horrors that they face. We have American children that face unimaginable horrors every day, that are abused, that are starved. So I cannot sympathize with what a parent chooses to do when they bring their children to this country illegally. I understand it's for humanitarian reasons, because they want a better life. Understand that. But you have to understand, and you have to understand and accept the risk that you take when you do it. So when you take that risk and you suffer the consequences of that risk, I'm sorry, don't come crying to me, because I'm not going to feel sorry for you.
You know, Ted,
I'm not.
I got it, and I think you'd probably agree with this, Jim. This is a real Democrat. This is a real American Democrat. Mm-hmm. He's talking about law and order. He's talking about American citizens and what is failing here. The Democrat Party has basically been gutted by super progressives that really don't care about law and order.
No.
If you had a minute, just like, a president gets to go and talk in front of the joint sessions, the Senate and the House, what would you tell them based on everything you know and what you've been exposed to over your 5 generations of family life as an Arizona rancher here on the border? What would you tell them?
I would tell them we need a wall, fence, a barrier. We need roads along the international boundary. There are no roads here. And we need forward operation bases. And they need to secure the international boundary at the boundary.
Yes.
Not try to do it 20 miles to the north of here,
right,
inside the United States. I would tell them it's a humanitarian thing to secure the border.
Yes, it is.
We need immigration. We love immigration, but not illegal immigration.
Yeah, like I mentioned to you, I'm a rancher as well. Right, Jim?
Yep.
I can sum it up really easily. If I walked into a joint session of the Senate and the House, I'd say, do your damn job and fix it. Just like I'd tell one of my ranch hands, get out there and do your damn job.
That's it.
Fix the fence. I'm tired of my cattle getting out.
Right.
Do your job.
I would put in a fence if I could afford it, 1, and 2, but this is federal land.
Yeah.
This is all U.S. Forest Service land.
Right.
And only the government can decide to put it in. There's no such thing as private property concerns.
No.
Right.
So the government needs to put it in.
It would literally take an act of Congress.
Well,
Yeah.
a Democrat with humor. I love it. Let me say this. The first fence of immigration that needs to take place is immigration policy reform that takes away all the incentives of them coming here illegally.
Absolutely.
Because realistically, if we had real immigration reform, this fence could work. Right?
Perhaps.
Well,
I
if
still
they-
think
if they-
you need an international boundary.
You do,
And
but
secure.
if you were caught 5 miles in, 10 miles in, you were illegally here, and you were just returned. I remember those days back in the 70s and 80s. You were just picked up, brought back. If that still took place, that would be a major deterrent. You can come to the front door, you can fill out your paperwork, and you're welcome to come in. But you come in the legal way.
Right, exactly.
Because my family is from Guadalajara, my wife's family is from Jalisco. The hardest working individuals we've come across as well, and you know this, is Hispanics that want to work.
Yes.
But the majority of the Hispanics you're walking across here aren't here to work.
No.
They're here to poison our communities. They're here to poison our children. They're here
Yes.
to destroy America unwittingly for that dollar.
Exactly.
That's
Right.
right. They have a job. The most people we see are walking back
Yeah.
to Mexico to get paid for bringing drugs in to poison our people.
That's right. So Congress, the Senate, do your damn job. I'm saying that straightforward. And I don't want to hear the crying, and we all understand the human tragedy of what's happening at the border. But the real human tragedy at the border is Congress failing to do their job. Jim, thank you for taking the time to drive us out here. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate
It's been an unbelievable pleasure to see this territory. It is gorgeous.
It
And
is.
just like, how would you say, open territory like this in the old days, as us riding our horses, the only dangers we had was some bobcats, mountain lions, rattlesnakes, and that's it. But now you've got armed drug smugglers that are going to shoot at you just for $1. God bless you, Jim.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ted Durden, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about trust, and I trust churchandlaw.com. When it comes to workers' compensation and employment law, you can trust churchandlaw.com. If you ever need legal advice you can rely on, it's churchandlaw.com. Black and white, no gray, churchandlaw.com. 818-230-3110. churchandlaw.com, a law firm you can trust and count on. All right, welcome back to the Voice of Reason. My name is Ted Durden, and I'm your host. Mark Reed is not here this evening. He had a speaking engagement. As indicated earlier, he is running for the 30th Congressional District. Now, you had an opportunity to view that clip that we had at the Mexican border. And as Jim Chilton indicated, it is not an easy life. It isn't. And as I indicated, we do need real immigration reform. You don't have to agree with what Donald Trump is doing, but he is attempting to do something. And I'm not trying to minimize the human plight, but there's more than one side to it. And too often we don't hear about that. We only hear about the human plight. We don't hear about what happens actually at the border with the ranchers that live there. We don't. So when you got a glimpse into what life is like there at the border. You got a little insight into it. I'm going to veer off a little bit and talk about these impeachment proceedings that we've had the misfortune to witness. While I do not agree with what the Democratic Party did, I understand why the House did it. They believed that they saw something with the phone call to the Ukraine. They thought that Donald Trump was possibly engaging in a bribe, even though when they talked about the articles of impeachment, bribery wasn't mentioned. It actually wasn't brought up until the House managers went to the Senate. I don't believe that it rose to the level where he should be removed from office, but they had a job to do, and they did it. What saddened me the most about these proceedings is that it became divisive. And I liken Donald Trump to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was a lightning rod for the Republican Party, even before she held political office as the Senator of New York and then later on as the Secretary of the State. She has long been reviled and hated by the Republican Party. Donald Trump has now assumed her position, where he is reviled and hated by the Democratic Party. As I've stated on this show before, I believe it's based on the fact that they don't like him as a person. He's crass, he's crude, he's unapologetic about what he has done. And I don't think there's been a president in our history who has pushed the limits of executive powers the way that Donald Trump has. Now, on the one hand, it may be one thing to admire. On the other hand, it may be something to fear. My biggest concern about Donald Trump and his administration, he has remade the Republican Party in its own image, where there are very, very few Republicans, especially that hold office, that disagree with the acts that he engages in. Very, very few. To me, that's a little bit alarming. One of the things that he did when he decided to take military funding and appropriate it to the building of the border wall. Congress has always controlled the purse. And yet when it came time to take a vote and reverse that, they capitulated. They conceded. That's a concern. That is an absolute concern. Now, what he is also engaged in, and why you think, okay, you may say to yourself, okay, finally, the impeachment is over. He can get back to the business of running this country. Nothing could be further from the truth. You have to bear in mind that there are still lawsuits that were filed by the Southern District of New York regarding the release of his taxes. There are other lawsuits that the House has filed against him. There are lawsuits that have been filed against him for release of information by other liberal groups as well. So even with the subsiding of the impeachment procedure, there's still a lot that still has to be ferreted off. There are still going to be issues going through the courts because even though he has been acquitted, he was not removed from office by the Senate. The Democrats are still going to proceed forward with the issue of whether or not witnesses that are subpoenaed by the House have to appear. They're going to let that roll through the courts. And that takes me another point that I talked about on an earlier podcast. You have to look at how shrewd Donald Trump is. He has you look over here while he's doing this over here. He has appointed almost 200 judges during his tenure in office. That's what he has done. That is why every time the House or the Democrats do something against him, he files a lawsuit. He puts it through litigation because he has started to fill the ranks of the judiciary with conservative thinkers. That's why right now, with the Supreme Court having a slight conservative tilt, he's going to push everything to the Supreme Court. You may not like him, but you have got to admire what he has done, the way he has shaped and molded his party into his image. Now, do I think it's a good idea that a president, regardless of the political affiliation, should be allowed to go unfettered or unchecked? No, I don't. Because if you want to go back to what happened to Bill Clinton, he was impeached in the House by both sides. It was a bipartisan impeachment. The impeachment that happened with Donald Trump, it was 100% partisan. I think, and I believe Mark corrected me on this, I think there was one Democrat who joined the Republicans in voting against his impeachment in the House. And I'll be honest with you, if I was in the House as a Democrat, I would have voted not to impeach him as well, because I don't think what he did rose to the level where he should have been removed from office. I think it was a bad idea. I think it has divided this country greatly. I believe the Democrats made a gross miscalculation when they decided to pursue the articles of impeachment. And I know that Nancy Pelosi had to have her arm twisted because she tried for the longest time not to pursue it. She staved off for as long as she could. But from the day that Donald Trump took office, he has had a bullseye on his back where the Democratic Party was going to do everything that they could to see that he failed and to be removed from office. And it takes me back to something that Rush Limbaugh said when Obama got elected. And he made the comment, we have to do everything in our power to make sure that he fails. That's a bad precedent. And I, like many people, do not agree that Rush Limbaugh deserved the Congressional Medal of Freedom. I don't think he did, because I've often viewed Rush Limbaugh, again, as a very divisive figure in politics, as a radio host. I don't think he warranted it. I don't think he merited it. I don't think he deserved it. Donald Trump did, so be it. There may also be those who were not happy with his State of the Union address. But again, you have to understand Donald Trump. I understand the man. Donald Trump loves nothing better than himself. Donald Trump is his greatest fan. He is. So the fact that he played video touting his accomplishments, the way that he went after those in the House who pushed forward the articles of impeachment, the way that they were maligned, I don't know why anybody's surprised. I wasn't. It was to be expected. That's how Donald Trump is. If you pull out a knife, he pulls out a gun. You pull out a gun, he pulls out a howitzer. That's what he does. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that when it comes to Donald Trump, and especially with the way that he runs his administration, he takes everything to court. You have to bear in mind, this is a man who threatened to sue his school if they release his SAT scores or the transcripts. I don't see why anybody is surprised. Again, I wasn't. Now I'm going to shift a little bit to the Iowa caucuses. What an utter fiasco that turned into. With the way they put this app in place that was supposed to track the votes, and the fact that we didn't have the results, I think we finally got them today when Buttigieg, again, please forgive me if I pronounce his name wrong, he held a slim lead over Bernie Sanders. So kudos to him, but the fact that we had to wait so long is ridiculous. And as expected, well, as was unexpected, Joe Biden did horrible in Iowa. So I think Joe Biden is making the same mistake that Hillary Clinton did. See, Hillary Clinton automatically felt that she was entitled to the Democratic nomination. She believed that she was entitled to the office of president. So she made a lot of missteps. Joe Biden is following in her footsteps. He is. I still believe that he is the best person to go up against Donald Trump. I'm telling you right now, my opinion only. If you have Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, or Pete Buttigieg as the Democratic nominee, yeah, Trump is going to walk right back into the White House. And I'll tell you why. Number one, as I've said before, no offense, please forgive me, we are not going to elect a short gay president. We're not. Number two, Bernie is too socialistic. 3, Elizabeth Warren, she just isn't very well liked. She just isn't. And what is even more disturbing, what has come to light, is the fact that Elizabeth Warren had 6 women of color abruptly leave her campaign that was based in Nevada. And the reason that they did is because they felt that they were marginalized, where they weren't heard, their opinions weren't given audience, and so they decided to leave. Pete Buttigieg faced the very same problem. He has an even larger problem, and I've said this before. African Americans, especially in the South, are not going to vote for a gay candidate. They're not. There have been interviews that were done on CNN by pastors in the South, by everyday citizens, African American citizens in the South, and they made it crystal clear. And of course, when he's asked about it, he talks about the fact that he believes he can bridge that gap. He believes that the African Americans will come around. Forget about it. That's not going to happen. I believe that Joe Biden is going to do incredibly well in the South. I believe he will. But how that's going to fare out for him in the end, I don't know. He's already fired somebody blaming her for what happened in Iowa, and there have been people that have come to her defense. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Of course, the telltale everybody's waiting for, Super Tuesday, that's going to come around. That should be interesting in of itself. Now I'm going to get back to the subject at hand. Speaking about immigration and these series of interviews and videos that you'll see that we call the real deal at the border. Now, in the coming weeks, what you're going to see, you're going to see interviews with Tim Foley he's the founder of the Arizona Border Recon. Had an opportunity to meet Tim, a very interesting individual. And he's doing this all on his own. He's doing it with little to no support. During the program, we'll put out his website for those who want to make donations to his cause. Because what he's doing is he's fighting for this country. And I think he is to be admired. He's using his own resources to do what he can about the illegal immigrants that are coming across the border, specifically the drug mules. And I think he needs all the help that he can get. I really do. We also had an opportunity to sit down and talk with Sheriff Mark Lamb of Pinal County, Arizona. It was a very interesting interview. We talked a lot about it. He gave us quite a few clips about the challenges that he faces on a daily basis regarding the illegal drug trafficking that comes across the border. This is a very important series because Mark Reed and I, and at Mark Reed's insistence, we're providing what I think is invaluable information to the community at large, to our listeners, to the country, who have, I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but I'll say that with the media only reporting about the human plight of the illegal immigrants and not thinking about what happened to those ranchers at the border and the daily challenges that they face with these drug mules coming across their property. It was very eye-opening for me. Well, we're winding down to the end of our show. Mark Reed will be back with me next week, co-hosting The Voice of Reason. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And remember, ignorance prevails when rational minds sit back and do nothing. We'll see you next week.
You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.